Did you know that there is a saint who crossed seas, faced unknown cultures, and dedicated his life to bringing hope and faith to the most remote corners of the world? This is not a fictional hero, but a real man who transformed lives and left a legacy that resonates centuries after his death. Today I will tell you the story of Saint Francis Xavier, the Apostle of the East, a man who, armed only with his faith, changed the course of history. Stay until the end, because you will discover not only his life, but also a powerful prayer that can transform yours. 1. Who was San Francisco Xavier? His birth and childhood. Francisco de Jasso y Azpilicueta was born on April 7, 1506, at the castle of Javier in Navarre, Spain. He was the youngest of 5 brothers in a noble family, at a time marked by religious and political tensions in Europe. From a young age, Francisco showed brilliant intelligence and a restless spirit, characteristics that would later define his extraordinary mission in life. Francisco's childhood took place in a privileged environment, but not without challenges. The death of his father and family conflicts over inheritance marked his early years. However, his mother, Maria de Azpilicueta, instilled in him a deep Catholic faith that would be the foundation of his future life. In his adolescence, Francisco showed a great interest in studies and decided to leave his home to attend the prestigious University of Paris. There, far from his family and surrounded by the intellectual effervescence of the time, he began to forge a path that would lead him to become a key figure in the history of the Catholic Church. During his time in Paris, Francisco met Ignatius of Loyola, a man who would change his life forever. At first, he resisted Ignatius's ideas, but little by little he was captivated by his spiritual vision and his passion for the mission of serving God. This encounter marked the beginning of his transformation from an ambitious young man to a devoted follower of Christ. Thus, the young Francisco went from being a noble dreamer to a man ready to abandon everything in search of a greater purpose. Unbeknownst to him, he was about to embark on an adventure that would take him to the ends of the world and make him one of the most venerated saints of all time. 2. The young Francisco, ambitions, dreams, and the encounter with Ignatius of Loyola. Francisco, being the youngest of 5 brothers, always had the desire to stand out and achieve great things in his life. In his youth, he was an ambitious boy, eager to take advantage of the privileges of his position and with the firm intention of achieving academic and social success. This dream led him to leave his homeland and travel to France, where he began his studies at the prestigious University of Paris. At the university, Francisco stood out for his intelligence and charisma. He was a young man full of life, passionate about knowledge, and known for his competitive nature. In that environment, he formed relationships with classmates who would share his journey, although no one yet imagined how much their lives would change. The vibrant atmosphere of Paris fueled his aspirations, but also confronted him with challenges that would temper his character. It was during this period that he met Ignatius of Loyola, a former soldier with a clear life mission, to form a group dedicated to serving God. At first, Francisco showed no interest in Ignatius's ideals. To him, material ambitions were his main objective, and he saw Loyola's efforts as a distraction on his path to success. However, Ignatius, with his patience and persuasion, planted seeds in Francisco's heart. Through deep conversations and moments of reflection, Francisco began to question the purpose of his life. Was it enough to achieve personal success, or was there something greater awaiting him? Little by little, his resistance turned into curiosity and then into a deep conviction. The relationship with Ignatius of Loyola marked a turning point in Francisco's life. What began as a casual encounter turned into a friendship that redefined his purpose. He set aside his personal aspirations to join Loyola's mission, initiating a life of sacrifice, service, and a faith that would take him to the farthest corners of the world. 3. The birth of the Society of Jesus. The mission that changed the world. The year 1534 marked a milestone in the history of Christianity. It was then that Ignatius of Loyola, along with a group of companions that included Francisco, founded the Society of Jesus, also known as the Jesuits. This group had a clear purpose: to renew the Catholic faith in a time of religious crisis and to expand Christ's message to the ends of the world. Francisco, although initially reluctant, became one of the most committed and visionary members of this movement. From the beginning, the Society of Jesus stood out for its innovative approach and adaptability. Unlike other religious orders, the Jesuits did not limit themselves to monastic life. They were willing to go wherever necessary. Their motto, Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam, for the greater glory of God, guided each of their actions. Francisco adopted this motto with fervor, seeing it as a personal calling to dedicate his life entirely to the divine mission. Francisco's commitment to the Society of Jesus was not easy. It required personal sacrifices, including renouncing his earthly dreams and accepting a life of poverty and obedience. For him, these sacrifices were not losses, but spiritual gains. This radical change in his life prepared him for the monumental challenges he would face in the following years. One of the most notable characteristics of the Jesuits was their focus on education and intellectual preparation. Francisco, with his sharp mind and passion for learning, excelled in this aspect. He dedicated himself to studying theology and philosophy, not only to deepen his faith, but also to be a leader capable of facing the cultural and spiritual complexities of the regions he would visit. With his training complete and his spirit strengthened, Francisco was ready to undertake the most challenging task of his life: to carry the gospel message to places where it had never reached before. The foundation of the Society of Jesus not only transformed his life, but also made him a pioneer of international missions, marking the beginning of an adventure that would leave an indelible mark on history. 4. Why did Francisco decide to leave everything to follow the faith? Francisco, before becoming one of the greatest missionaries in history, was a young man with great personal ambitions. Coming from a noble family, he had a path set out for him to achieve success and social recognition. However, a series of encounters and decisions led him to renounce everything he had dreamed of. What drove this such a radical transformation in his life? The change began with the profound impact that Ignatius of Loyola had on his heart. Although initially Francisco saw Ignatius as a man obsessed with religious ideals that seemed impractical, he soon understood the depth and conviction of his words. Loyola did not just speak of faith, but of action, of a commitment that required tangible sacrifices. This awakened in Francisco a restlessness. What was he doing to fulfill a higher purpose? Another decisive moment was the spiritual experience Francisco had while reflecting on his own life. He realized that, despite his academic and social achievements, he felt an inner void. The words of the gospel began to resonate in his mind, especially the passage, "What good is it for a man to gain the whole world if he loses his soul?" This questioning led him to reevaluate his priorities and ask himself what value success really had without a connection to something eternal. The influence of his Jesuit companions also played a crucial role. Seeing their dedication and the sense of purpose with which they lived, Francisco felt an irresistible calling. It was not just about joining a group, but being part of a mission that could transform lives and give hope to the most needy. In his heart, the desire to be an instrument of peace and love was born, even if it meant renouncing the comforts of his previous life. Finally, his decision was neither easy nor immediate. Francisco struggled with doubts and fears, but the certainty that God was calling him was stronger than any obstacle. Thus, he left behind his home, his family, and his earthly ambitions to follow a path of faith, commitment, and sacrifice. This step marked the beginning of an extraordinary life dedicated to serving others and fulfilling a divine mission that would take him to the ends of the world. 5. The first mission, arriving in India in search of souls. In 1542, Francisco left Lisbon for Goa, in India, embarking on the first of many missions that would mark his life. This journey was not simply a physical relocation, but the beginning of a spiritual adventure that would lead him to face unknown cultures, extreme challenges, and a faith that would be constantly tested. He was a man driven by the conviction to carry Christ's message to those who had never heard it. The sea voyage lasted over a year and was filled with difficulties. Storms, illness, and precarious conditions tested the resilience of Francisco and his crew. However, his faith never wavered. During the journey, he took every opportunity to preach and console the sailors, who soon began to see him as a spiritual leader. For Francisco, even that arduous journey was part of his divine mission. Upon arriving in Goa, Francisco found a reality far different from what he had imagined. Although the city was a vibrant commercial center under Portuguese rule, it was also a place where inequalities and abuses were evident. The Portuguese colonizers, in many cases, did not live according to Christian principles, and the local communities faced exploitation and poverty. This drove Francisco not to limit himself to preaching, but also to act in defense of the most vulnerable. Francisco's dedication to his mission led him to learn the local languages and immerse himself in the customs of the people he wanted to reach. He did not see his work merely as converting, but as understanding and accompanying. His early years in Goa were marked by deep work with the sick, the poor, and children, who found in him a beacon of hope and love. The mission in India was not only an external challenge, but also an internal test for Francisco. He faced moments of solitude, misunderstanding, and physical exhaustion, but his faith in God sustained him. This first chapter of his missionary life cemented his reputation as a tireless, committed, and compassionate man, someone willing to give everything for his mission of love and faith. 6. Miracles or determination. The saint who enchanted the peoples and rulers. During his mission in India and other regions of the East, Francisco began to be known not only for his tireless work, but also for the miracles that many claimed to have witnessed. These events, real or interpreted as divine signs, played a crucial role in his impact on both the local communities and the authorities of the territories he visited. But were they true miracles, or the fruit of an unshakable faith and boundless determination? One of the most well-known accounts occurred on the coasts of Travancore, where Francisco tirelessly preached to communities that had never heard of Christ. It is said that one day, facing a severe drought, he fervently prayed for rain. Shortly after, an unexpected storm arrived, saving the local harvests. This event solidified his reputation as a man with special power, but Francisco always attributed it to divine intervention and not to his own merits. Another aspect that amazed those who knew him was his ability to quickly learn the local languages and communicate with people in their own cultural context. Although he did not always speak perfectly, his effort to understand and respect local traditions earned him the trust of the people. Many considered this gift a miracle of understanding, a sign of his special connection with the Holy Spirit. Francisco also had a unique talent for negotiating with local rulers, who, although initially distrustful, ended up impressed by his humility and wisdom. On several occasions, political and military leaders offered him protection, resources, and even opened doors for him to preach in territories that would otherwise have remained closed. His ability to create strategic alliances was key to expanding his mission. Although the idea of miracles surrounded his figure, Francisco always insisted that the true miracle was the transformation of hearts. His determination, unshakable faith, and ability to connect with people of all classes and cultures were proof of a man deeply devoted to his mission. For him, the greatest miracle was seeing a community united in love and hope, putting aside differences and conflicts. 7. The journey to Japan, faith in forbidden lands. In 1549, Francisco made one of the boldest decisions of his life, to carry the message of Christianity to Japan. For him, this country represented a monumental challenge. It was a land with strong spiritual and cultural traditions, closed to external influences, especially religious ones. However, Francisco saw in Japan a unique opportunity to spread the faith in a completely new context. The journey to Japan was long and dangerous. Francisco sailed through unknown waters, facing storms and risks of shipwreck. He finally arrived in Kagoshima on the island of Kyushu in 1550. There he was received with curiosity and distrust by the Japanese, who saw foreigners as a rarity. Francisco, with his humility and adaptability, quickly began learning Japanese and studying local customs, gradually earning the trust of the people. During his time in Japan, Francisco discovered that Japanese philosophy and spirituality were deeply complex. Buddhist and Shinto concepts predominated in the culture, and Christianity was seen as a foreign and strange religion. However, Francisco dedicated himself to establishing respectful dialogue with local leaders, explaining his faith in a way that resonated with their values and beliefs. One of his greatest difficulties was the lack of religious texts translated into Japanese. This led him to create a basic catechism in the local language, a monumental effort that required not only a deep knowledge of the language, but also of the culture. This catechism was his main tool for teaching the principles of Christianity, and although he faced resistance, he succeeded in planting the first seeds of faith in Japan. Despite his efforts, Francisco faced many challenges in Japan. Some local leaders saw him as a threat, and his mission never achieved the massive success he had imagined. However, his legacy in Japan was significant, as he established the foundations for future missionaries and left a lasting impression in the communities he encountered. For Francisco, his time in Japan was a test of faith and perseverance, a reminder that success is not always measured in numbers, but in spiritual and human impact. 8. Conversion or conflict. The controversy of his mission in the East. Francisco's mission in the East, particularly in regions like India, Japan, and parts of Southeast Asia, was marked by notable achievements, but also by a series of controversies. His approach to spreading Christianity led him to face both admiration and rejection, sparking debates about the nature of his mission and the methods he employed. Was he a peacemaker, a visionary, or someone who, unintentionally, generated cultural conflicts? One of the most controversial aspects of his work was the mass conversion of entire communities. In regions like the Malabar Coast, Francisco baptized thousands of people, often in a single day. To some critics, this approach seemed hasty, and they questioned whether the conversions were genuine or merely a strategy to increase numbers. However, Francisco saw this process as a gateway, an opportunity for people to begin their path to faith. Cultural clash was another major challenge. In every region, Francisco had to find a balance between teaching Christianity and respecting local traditions. While in many cases he showed remarkable cultural sensitivity, there were situations where his efforts were perceived as a threat to traditional beliefs. This generated tensions, especially with religious leaders who feared losing their influence in the face of a new faith's arrival. In Japan, for example, Francisco's mission was initially received with interest, but soon aroused hostility from some local leaders. They saw Christianity as a tool of European colonizers to exert political control. Although Francisco always insisted that his purpose was exclusively spiritual, relationships between missionaries and local authorities were often marked by suspicion. Despite the criticisms, Francisco defended his mission with unwavering faith. He believed that conversion was a process that began with an external act but had to be followed by an internal transformation. For him, every soul that accepted baptism was a victory, not for him, but for Christ's message. This conviction drove him to continue his work even in the most adverse conditions. The controversy surrounding his mission did not diminish his impact. Although he faced criticism from both his contemporaries and subsequent generations, Francisco succeeded in establishing a bridge between cultures, introducing Christianity into regions where it had never previously reached. His legacy demonstrates that missions were not only about conversion, but also about learning, adapting, and seeking points of connection amidst differences. 9. The Tragedy of Sancian, the Last Days of Saint Francisco Xavier. In 1552, Francisco undertook his last and most ambitious mission, to reach China, a territory still unexplored by Christianity. For him, China represented the pinnacle of his missionary work, an opportunity to bring Christ's message to the heart of one of the world's oldest and most powerful civilizations. However, this mission would be marked by tragedy. The journey to China began with difficulties from the start. Francisco sailed to the island of Sancian, located off the coast of Canton, hoping to find a guide to help him enter Chinese territory. But conditions on the island were extremely harsh. The climate was inclement, food was scarce, and diseases were abundant. Despite these challenges, Francisco did not lose hope, trusting that his faith would sustain him. For weeks, Francisco waited on Sancian, facing growing isolation. His fellow missionaries could not accompany him, and local authorities made any attempt to advance toward China difficult. This solitude, combined with precarious living conditions, began to affect his health. Little by little, his body started to weaken, although his spirit remained firm. On the 1st of December, 1552, Francisco finally succumbed to fever and exhaustion. He died in a humble hut, far from his loved ones and the land where he so desired to bring Christianity. His death was a moment of deep sadness, but also of hope for those who accompanied him spiritually, as they saw in his sacrifice the culmination of a life entirely dedicated to God. Although he did not manage to reach China in his lifetime, Francisco's legacy did not end with his death. His efforts inspired other missionaries to continue his work, carrying the Christian message to new frontiers. The tragedy of Sancian became a symbol of Francisco's total commitment to his faith, reminding us that his mission was not just a physical journey, but also a testimony of love and dedication. 10. Canonization and the miracles, attributed to Saint Francisco Xavier. Francisco's death in 1552 did not mark the end of his influence. On the contrary, it was the beginning of a veneration that would extend through the centuries. His life of sacrifice, his tireless missionary work, and the miracles attributed to his intercession made him a central figure in the Catholic Church. His canonization, years later, was a recognition of his extraordinary spiritual impact. In 1562, Pope Gregory XV canonized Francisco along with Ignatius of Loyola and other notable saints of the time. It was a historic moment that confirmed Francisco's place in the pantheon of great defenders of the faith. This recognition not only celebrated his work, but also inspired future generations to follow his example of total dedication to God's mission. One of the most fascinating aspects of his canonization was the number of miracles associated with his intercession. Among the most well-known is the account of his incorrupt body. Despite having died in precarious conditions and not receiving proper embalming, Francisco's body remained surprisingly well preserved, which many interpreted as a divine sign. This event attracted thousands of pilgrims to the place where his remains lay, solidifying his fame as a miraculous saint. Another miracle attributed to Francisco occurred in Goa, where he was credited with resurrecting a child who had fallen into a well. According to testimonies, the child's family fervently prayed to Francisco, and the child inexplicably regained life. This and other similar accounts contributed to the growing devotion towards him, reinforcing his image as a powerful intercessor before God. Today, Saint Francisco Xavier is venerated not only as the Apostle of the East, but also as a symbol of hope, faith, and courage. His canonization was not merely an act of historical recognition, but a testament that his spirit remains alive in the communities he transformed and in the miracles that many claim to have experienced through his intercession. 11. The incorrupt body, mystery or miracle. One of the most intriguing aspects of Saint Francisco Xavier's life and death is the state of his body after his passing. When he died on December 2, 1552, on the island of Sancian, few could have imagined that his body would become a symbol of devotion and one of the most discussed mysteries in the history of the Catholic Church. Its preservation over the centuries has generated awe, faith, and unanswered questions. After his death, Francisco's body was buried on the island of Sancian in precarious conditions. However, several months later, when his followers decided to transfer his remains to Goa, they discovered something surprising. The body was practically intact, as if death had not affected his flesh. This discovery was considered a miracle and reinforced the belief that Francisco was a truly holy man. Francisco's body was placed in a church in Goa, where it remains to this day. Over the centuries, it has been subject to numerous inspections by religious and scientific authorities. On each occasion, the body has shown an unusual level of preservation for a corpse of that age, despite not having been traditionally embalmed. This phenomenon has been interpreted by believers as a divine sign of his sanctity. However, this mystery has also sparked skepticism. Some scholars suggest that climatic conditions and other natural factors could have contributed to the body's preservation. Despite these theories, no definitive explanation has been found to completely discredit the miraculous nature of this phenomenon. For millions of faithful, Francisco's body's state remains a tangible proof of his special connection with the divine. Saint Francisco Xavier's incorrupt body continues to attract thousands of pilgrims each year. For them, it is not just a reliquary, but a living symbol of faith and hope. The sight of his body reminds visitors that true greatness does not reside in the material, but in the ability to transform lives through love, compassion, and dedication to a higher purpose. 12. How Saint Francisco Xavier became the patron of missions. Saint Francisco Xavier is known today as the patron of missions, a title that reflects his tireless dedication to bringing Christianity to the most remote corners of the world. However, this recognition was not granted to him immediately, but was the result of centuries of veneration and the lasting influence of his work in Christian communities. What made him an unsurpassed model for missionaries of all time? From his early years as a missionary in India, Francisco showed a unique ability to adapt to local cultures and a genuine desire to understand the people he preached to. For him, the mission was not just about converting, but about serving and accompanying. This transformative vision inspired generations of missionaries, who found in Francisco an example of how to balance faith with respect for the traditions of other peoples. Francisco's global impact was another key reason for his recognition as patron. He was one of the first Europeans to bring Christianity to places like Japan, the Moluccas, and other parts of Asia. His legacy not only left thriving Christian communities, but also planted the seeds for future missions. The magnitude of his reach was almost inconceivable for his time, making him a symbol of Christianity's expansion into unknown territories. In 1927, Pope Pius XI officially declared Saint Francisco Xavier the patron of missions alongside Saint Teresa of Lisieux. The choice of these two saints was significant. Francisco represented external missionary work, bringing faith to distant lands, while Teresa, with her life of prayer and contemplation, symbolized the internal dimension of the mission. Together, they embodied the idea that missionary work begins in the heart and extends to the world. Today, Saint Francisco Xavier remains an inspiring figure for all those who seek to bring hope and faith to others. His example reminds us that being a missionary does not always involve traveling far, but being willing to step out of our comfort zone to serve others with love and compassion. As patron of missions, he continues to be a beacon of light for the Church and for those seeking to transform the world with the message of the gospel. 13. How Saint Francisco Xavier transformed the history of Christianity. Saint Francisco Xavier's influence on the history of Christianity is undeniable. Through his life and work, he not only marked the beginning of a new era in the expansion of Christianity to the East, but also established a model of evangelization that still inspires missionaries and religious leaders today. His legacy is not just a series of historical events, but a living testimony of how faith and determination can change the course of history. Francisco was a pioneer in the mission to bring Christianity to Asia, a territory where religion was practically unknown. In an era when traveling meant months of dangers at sea and adapting to new cultures was an immensely difficult task, he not only accepted the challenge, but embraced it with enthusiasm. In places like India, Japan, and the Moluccas, he planted the seeds of faith that would flourish long after his death. One of the most revolutionary aspects of his mission was his approach to enculturation, that is, the ability to adapt the Christian message to local traditions without imposing a European vision. This was particularly notable in Japan, where Francisco strove to understand local philosophy and spirituality to present Christianity as a complement, not a threat. Although this approach was not always perfect, it laid the foundation for future, more inclusive missions. In addition to his spiritual impact, Francisco also transformed the Church's vision on missions. Before him, missionary work was seen as something geographically limited. Francisco broke these barriers by demonstrating that the gospel could reach the most remote corners of the world. His example inspired generations of missionaries who continued his work in Africa, America, and Asia, making Christianity a truly global religion. Saint Francisco Xavier's legacy in the history of Christianity is not just that of a man who traveled far, but of someone who redefined how faith could be lived and shared. His bravery, adaptability, and compassion make him an eternal model for those seeking to make a difference in the world. Through his life, he showed that true transformation begins with a willing heart to serve, and his impact continues to inspire humanity to this day. Complete prayer to Saint Francisco Xavier. O glorious Saint Francisco Xavier, tireless apostle and patron of missions, we come to you with humility and faith, seeking your powerful intercession. You who crossed oceans, faced dangers, and brought hope to the world's ends, teach us to live with the same burning love for God and for humanity. You who consecrated your life to serving the most needy, guide our hearts so that we may follow your example of dedication and compassion. Help us to overcome difficulties and find strength in our faith, always reminding us that with God, all things are possible. Pray for us so that, like you, we may live our lives to the fullest, dedicated to a higher purpose. Intercede before the Heavenly Father for our needs, both spiritual and material. Relieve those who suffer, strengthen those whose faith is weak, and comfort those facing moments of despair. May your example of courage and determination inspire us never to give up our convictions, even in the darkest moments. Saint Francisco Xavier, protector of souls and guide of missionaries, we ask you to help us carry the message of God's love to all those around us. May our words and actions reflect the goodness and mercy that you embodied during your life. Be our companion on our own path of faith, showing us how to walk with humility and strength. O blessed Saint, hear our prayers and carry our petitions to the throne of God. May, through your intercession, we experience peace, joy, and divine grace in our lives. We ask you to protect us, inspire us, and guide us until one day we can join you in the eternal glory of heaven. Amen.